Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. The U.S. president wants a great relationship with Pakistan while rehashing an accusation that it harbors enemies. Pakistan insists blame for U.S. failures in Afghanistan cannot be placed on its shoulders, especially while the country is working overtime to help the U.S. resolve the Afghan quagmire. Nevertheless, Trump's tone was more conciliatory and indicative that a meeting between the American and Pakistani leadership is to happen soon. What will this mean for bilateral relations? To discuss all that a bit further, we're joined now by Air Vice Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry, who is a defense analyst and ex-deputy air chief of the Pakistan Air Force, and he is joining us from Islamabad now. Mr. Shahzad Chaudhry, thanks for joining us here in the Scope once again. I wanted to get your thoughts on Donald Trump's statement, a bit more conciliatory, of course, and as the Foreign Office has reacted, and we'll bring that statement up as well right now, the Foreign Office essentially saying that it is looking forward to better relations with the United States, to this meeting at the highest level between the Pakistani and American leaderships. This is all very positive, is it not, Mr. Chaudhry?
Surely, it looks very positive, and it's a welcome change of heart, especially with President Trump, because he had been pretty critical of Pakistan and Pakistan's role, unfortunately, in his last couple of years, statements and tweets that he made repeatedly. But like we said the last time when we spoke, that it's more like an institutional thing that perhaps should sustain longer than what a presidential tweet does in the U.S. currently. So I feel that the institutional run of things is far more effective there now than what President Trump has been saying. And that really indicates that Pakistan's support, Pakistan's help, Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, the U.S. thinks is key to sustaining some solution from Afghanistan. So I feel that being the case, what President Trump has said is indicative of the fact that the U.S. wants Pakistan to take on more responsibility in helping them resolve Afghanistan, which is a clear change of stance and heart from the years of denigrative statements that they've been making about Pakistan.
And so then let's talk then, if we can, about the past for a moment, because as you well know, in November, Donald Trump came out quite strongly against Pakistan in that tweet, and then Prime Minister Imran Khan responded, talking about the many sacrifices that Pakistan has made in this war on terror, as the U.S. has titled it. What do you make of do you think, let me term it this way, do you think the U.S. has realized that Prime Minister Khan and Pakistan have really made a point in that sense, that Pakistan has stood up against terrorism and has really been working towards peace in Afghanistan?
That too, I think Pakistan's own role within Pakistani borders and within Pakistan has been quite effective in terms of eliminating terrorism. And we claim figures like more than 80% or 85% or 95% in some areas is about the kind of terror or terrorism that has been eliminated in Pakistani areas. So that has brought about a sense of peace and calm within Pakistan, and the world sees that. So Pakistani forces, Pakistani efforts and strategy have been very effective within Pakistan, and we tend to boast about it a little bit in the world today, after having been trashed quite a bit by them by saying that if there is a success story about Pakistan or any country fighting terror, that is Pakistan's story. So I think that is being noted in the capitals around the world. Having said that, I think there's also a change of strategy in the U.S. I think the simultaneous announcement of coming out of Syria as well as Afghanistan indicates that change of strategy or change of thought there. And they realize that they've been spending the trillions without sufficient or significant return back to the American interest or American taxpayer. So really, is there a need for the U.S. to continue to spend that kind of money in Syria or in Afghanistan? And answer probably to them is no. There is a far larger need within the U.S. borders for them to be able to focus there. And secondly, I feel there could be a deeper meaning to it as well. Syria or ISIS pressure within Syria having been reduced considerably but not entirely eliminated means that a part of war is still left behind. And that part of war in Syria could actually embroil the remaining players like Russia, Turkey,
Yeah.
Hezbollah, Iran, etc., and Syria itself. Now, does that mean that a new wave of a war will begin in Syria? So I am just mentioning Syria here
Yeah.
in terms of considering a replication in Afghanistan. So if the US walks out,
Yeah.
does that mean that there is no more a US side now, and it's just now the players within Afghanistan, which means Pakistan, China, Iran, India to a certain degree, Afghanistan itself, of course, it is inviting Russia as well to come and
Yeah.
take care of after the US has left. The US has been for a long, long time, forever actually, been wanting Pakistan to take on their side of the war. They count the billions that they've been giving to Pakistan, and they've been saying that Pakistan must do more. And when it said it wanted Pakistan to do more, it actually meant for Pakistan to take on the war that US was fighting in Afghanistan. Now, obviously, that didn't marry much with Pakistan's own objectives.
If I could just
all,
interrupt you for a moment, I do apologize, but I wanted to pick up on that point that you made because I think it's an important one, where, as you correctly said, of course, Donald Trump essentially is saying really very clearly that he wants the regional countries to take over essentially in Afghanistan. But then the Pakistani spokesperson, the Foreign Office spokesperson, Mohammed Faisal, saying that the withdrawal of U.S. troops should be part of a peace process with a view to ensuring that there is no power vacuum in Afghanistan. And of course, that again is a repetition of what you've already said there. But picking up on that, then, do you think that these regional countries, be it Pakistan, be it India, be it Russia, be it China, that all of these working together can, in fact, ensure that there is no power vacuum in Afghanistan?
Now, look, there's an ideal peace solution to Afghanistan, which includes all that you just said. That all factors work in harmony, the Chinese, the Russians, the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Iranians, and the Afghans all sit together and decide that we've had enough of strife in this area and in this region, especially Afghanistan, and we need to now put things together. That demands or assumes an absolutely resplendent behavior by all participants, obviously. Now, life isn't that clean, unfortunately, and there are interests and counter-interests that begin to make their effect. So what I'm really trying to say is that I think the process has begun. When the U.S. announces that it is going to cut down to the troops level to 7,000, it actually is indicating to the Taliban that they're serious in vacating the area, in vacating the region, and so therefore there is a possibility for the Taliban to go ahead and continue to talk to and look for peace and look at peace as a very probable outcome of this entire process. So that is one side of it. The second is, of course, engaging Pakistan to try and do as much as Pakistan can initially in terms of enabling peace through talks. And if not that, then Pakistan perhaps, and the American thoughts, taking on the role of what the Americans are doing. In fact, President Trump has just recently, I think, believe yesterday or day before, said that why don't countries within the region take on the war fighting as the U.S. has had to do for such a long time.
All right, we're just going to go into a very short break as we continue our discussion about U.S.-Pakistan relations at this point in time, as Donald Trump has seemingly struck a more conciliatory tone. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us, viewers, as we continue to take a look at Donald Trump's outreach, seemingly, to Pakistan, his more conciliatory tone, where he has essentially spoken about a possible direct meeting between the Pakistani and American leadership, amongst other statements that he made as well. To discuss this further in this segment, we're now joined by ex-ambassador, I should say, to the United States, Ambassador Najmuddin Sheikh, who is joining us from Karachi, and we're also joined now by Brigadier Nader Mir, who is a defense analyst, and he's the chairman of the Pakistan National Reform Movement. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Ambassador Sheikh, if I can, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of Donald Trump's statements? How significant is this for bilateral relations?
Yes, I think it's a forward movement. It's obviously also something in which he chose to repeat what he had said earlier about cutting off aid to Pakistan, which he said was seemingly flowing like water in the past, but that he'd cut this 1.3 billion off. And the very fact that he wants to talk is, of course, related to his plans for Afghanistan, or his hope that reconciliation will move forward and that Pakistan has a key role to play in moving that particular process forward. So it is related to both things, to Afghanistan and to the fact that whether Trump realizes this or not, but the establishment in Washington is, of course, very clear that Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state in a region which is which is viewed as very unstable, and therefore that the United States has an interest in ensuring stability and economic prosperity in Pakistan, so that anything movement in that direction of further instability or the weapons falling into the wrong hands can be put off. Now, this is not something that Trump spoke about, but this is something which is very much in the mind of the Department of State and other professionals in Washington.
I wonder if I can, if you allow me, Ambassador, I wanted to bring in Brigadier Amir into this conversation. Brigadier Amir, I wonder what you make of what Ambassador Sheikh there said. Do you think that, as he mentioned there, the fact that Pakistan is a strong country militarily as well, that those factors also have played into, at this point in time at the very least, this outreach seemingly by the Trump administration?
Well, President Trump's recent overture to Pakistan is very welcome because of the fact that Pakistan needs peace in Afghanistan as much as we needed peace in Pakistan. And the time has come for the exit strategy of United States from Afghanistan. That's what it's all about. And on the larger picture, on the bigger picture, President Trump has also finished the military mission in Syria. So he's moving in another direction from what America was doing about 20 years back. That is the military interventions which started with Iraq and Afghanistan. And he is, in his worldview, having a totally different perspective. And that's why there is a difference between him and the American establishment, or some of the, let's even call the Pentagon or even the State Department. But the policy he's pursuing suits Pakistan. Suits Pakistan in the sense that once the Americans draw down or reduce their forces in Afghanistan to half and eventually to complete, that is the first step, because unless the Americans exit from Afghanistan, there's going to be no peace in Afghanistan. The Afghan history is of resistance to all invaders from Alexander the Great till today. And in my book, Geopolitics Pakistan, published 2013, I had quoted the Taliban, Afghan Taliban, that the Americans have the watches, but the Taliban or the resistance has the time. And that's been proved now. So we should support this American exit from there, because after all, to exit, a stable Afghanistan has to be left behind. We're not interested, and nobody should be interested in another civil war in Afghanistan as far as Afghanistan is concerned. That part is there. But Pakistan has to also ensure that its own interests are guarded. That is, in Afghanistan, the spoiler is called India, because India doesn't want peace in Afghanistan. It is using Afghanistan as a second base of operations for terrorists against Pakistan. So this Afghan, the post-exit, or after the Americans leave or when they're leaving, it should leave a peaceful, stable Afghanistan, and Pakistan is the principal player for that, along with, of course, the United States.
Okay, I wanted to add another voice to this conversation, gentlemen. We're also joined by Rahma Bakai, who is an international relations expert. She's joining us from Karachi. She's also chairperson, associate professor, media and communications at IBA, and she also holds a PhD in international relations. Dr. Bakai, thanks for joining us here in the scope. Dr. Bakai, what do you make of Trump's statement vis-a-vis Pakistan? When we talk about Afghanistan specifically, of course, and the U.S. pullout from there, the Pakistani Foreign Office has said that the withdrawal of U.S. troops should be part of a peace process with a view to ensuring that there's no power vacuum in Afghanistan. And that term, power vacuum, I imagine, is an important one for Pakistan. What do you make of that?
Well, I am cautiously optimistic, because the statement that Trump made, what came out of is based on the findings of two think tanks. And the think tanks suggested that not just Pakistan, but India, Russia, Pakistan, and perhaps also China should play a role about peace in Afghanistan, in some ways take responsibility of that. So if you see that the tweet that Trump made had two components to it. The one component was about engaging Pakistan and was cordial in nature. But at the same time, he re-emphasized all the concerns that he and other presidents have sort of flagged about Pakistan. So I'm very cautiously optimistic here. Peace in Afghanistan is not something that we work for because US asked us to do it. We work for peace in Afghanistan because it suits our own goals and objectives. And our goal and objectives are sort of linked to our connectivity construct, our geo-economic paradigm of foreign policy, and the fact that if a neighbor is if there's active conflict in a neighborhood, it just falls adversely. So Pakistan has agreed to play a positive role and facilitate bringing the Taliban to the negotiating table. And US has shown flexibility and responded by talking directly to the Taliban and also withdrawing forces. Now, this withdrawal of forces is a very tricky phenomena. There are 14,000 troops. They want to bring it down to 7,000. Pakistan is not totally averse to the idea. But the fact remains that if you withdraw troops from an area of active conflict, the security vacuum that emanates can be a source of huge concern. And that is a concern that has been voiced by practically all the stakeholders. I think Pakistan also has skepticism about it because the fallout of a security deterioration on the ground would be for Pakistan, if not for other countries as well.
If you allow me, Dr. Bakai, if you allow me to come in here, because I wanted to bring in Ambassador Sheikh, if you allow me, Dr. I want to put some of the points that you made there to him. Ambassador Sheikh, I wanted to ask you, as Dr. Bakai there mentioned, Pakistan has always wanted and worked towards having peace in Afghanistan, but the narrative, as you know, Ambassador Sheikh, is not that in the West. That it seems that, in their minds, at the very least, that the U.S. has had to push Pakistan to work towards, these talks in Abu Dhabi or this foreign minister trip, regional trip that Mr. Qureshi took in this region. And even Senator Lindsey Graham, as you know, Ambassador Sheikh, has offered some sort of a free trade agreement as an incentive to Pakistan. So it seems on their part that it's the U.S. pushing Pakistan towards, forcing it almost, its hand to encourage peace and to force the Taliban to come to the table. What do you make of that narrative, Ambassador?
That is correct, but it is also correct that Pakistan, there is a clear realization in Pakistan, to which Dr. Bakai referred in part, that we want the American troops, for instance, to stay on until there is a degree of economic stability in Afghanistan, and until Afghanistan is able to stand, at least in part, on its own feet. And for that, it's necessary that American financial assistance should continue, both for the Afghan National Defense Security Forces, to which the Americans contribute $4.1 billion a year. If that is cut off, you will have 320 people from the ANDSF, or the Afghan National Defense Security Force, on the streets with only one skill, using a gun. And that will exacerbate the unemployment problem that already exists in Afghanistan and will make for a very unstable situation. So I think for Pakistan, let us start from the premise that no other country benefits as much from peace in Afghanistan as does Pakistan. If peace does not come, and if instead of reconciliation, you have a continuation of the level of civil strife that you have right now, what will happen is that the Taliban will control the areas or be dominant in the areas that abut on your border, and the Northern Alliance will be resurrected in the north, as it was in the past, with apparently the same people supporting it as was done in the past. And as a result, you will find that your border becomes highly unstable, and the TTP and the TTA may find that they have more in common than they have than is apparent right now. So for Pakistan, it is important that peace comes while Afghanistan acquires a modicum of economic stability. So for Pakistan to work with the Afghans on the Afghans and the Americans on this is very much Pakistani interest, and that is what they are trying to do. I am hopeful that when the next meeting is held in Saudi Arabia, that meeting will move us towards persuading the Taliban that they have to now sit at the negotiating table. That negotiating table should bring a ceasefire, a local ceasefire, and then perhaps a nationwide ceasefire. And
if you allow me on that point, Ambassador Sheikh, because I think it's important to bring up this talk of how much influence Pakistan has on the Taliban to begin with. And Brigadier Mir, I wanted to get your opinion on that, because at many times it seems like everyone just keeps saying Pakistan needs to bring the Taliban to the table. Is it that simple? Is it that easy for Pakistan to just wake up one day and tell the Taliban, you must come to the negotiating table?
Well, firstly, Pakistan has to be prepared for both the eventualities. I mean, two contingencies. One is that this American exit or the NATO exit is part of or followed by a negotiated settlement, a peace settlement of Afghanistan. This is the first contingency or one possibility. But the other is that in some point of time, there is no peace agreement as such. There is no that stable arrangement, and the Americans draw down and eventually they leave. That's also possible. I mean, you can't rule it out, especially with Trump. So both the things affect Pakistan in different ways, and we have to be ready for both and prepared for both. That is first. As far as your question regarding the degree of influence on the Taliban that Pakistan wields, well, yes, Pakistan wields a certain level of influence, but it doesn't. But actually, it's not one organized body. It's not an army as such. It's not one political force or military force or even an asymmetrical force. They are split into many factions, and they have different geographical, ethnic, linguistic, and other aspects to the resistance that is giving to the Americans and to the NATO forces. So all of them being brought about and being dictated or forced by Pakistan, I don't think it can be done the way it is assumed to be done. It can't be done like that. They tell them, okay, make peace. You made war for 18 years, and now since we are telling you make peace, it's not like that. So, in any case, they have sacrificed a complete generation. They've been fighting, and they're on the winning side. The Americans are moving out. Everybody, they know it. Trump's statement was welcomed by the Afghan Taliban. So when they know that they are on the winning side, it's just a matter of time, at best in a year, maybe two. What? Why should they come to the table and get dictated?
Yeah.
So it has to be an arrangement which is a win-win arrangement in which the resistance or the Afghan Taliban, they get their due share in the political arrangement of whatever arrangement works out. That is if it works out. Pakistan has to ensure its own interests. Our interests are twofold. One are geostrategic and the other are geoeconomic, and they're both related. One is that Pakistan has to be secured from the Afghan side, that there are no terrorist attacks, there is no Indian-sponsored terror hybrid war going on from there, or even independent this TTP or any other ISIS or anything remnants waging any kind of asymmetrical war against Pakistan. This is one from the Afghan soil. The other is that Pakistan is interested in this geoeconomics that has been mentioned. It's incidentally related to my book, Waqar on the Global Chessboard, in which Afghanistan is a route to Central Asia and connecting it with Gwadar and CPEC. So that too is an interest for Pakistan. So we want a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. However, we have to ensure that whatever happens, our interests, that is Pakistan's interests, are guarded.
Okay, I just wanted to, very quick if I can, I know that we're running out of time, but I wanted to get a final comment from you, Ambassador Sheikh. Because you've been an ambassador in the United States in the past, I wanted to get your point of view about, at this point in time, the trust deficit that exists between the two sides. Do you think both sides will be able to overcome that if there is a direct meeting between the Pakistani and American leaderships?
Important to realize that when you talk about ethnic differences, etc., in Afghanistan, frankly, the Taliban have proved that they can act together. They had a ceasefire for Eid al-Fitr, and this was declared by Habatullah Akhund, the current leader, and everybody obeyed. Everybody came to town. So there is a certain degree of unity, a certain degree to which the present leadership of the Taliban can get everybody to fall in line. Second, I think we should recognize that when the Americans believe that we have influence with the Taliban, that we do have influence, that the Taliban are, well, whether we like it or not, many Taliban leaders have moved into Afghanistan, and particularly into Helmand, but many more are right here. And there is the view that, and you will hear this in American reports, that they are treated in Pakistani hospitals, that they have their refugee camps here, and that many of those refugee camps, they of course ignore the fact that we've asked them repeatedly that please move the refugee camps into Afghanistan, and we will continue to supply them from here. But that's another matter. The point is that at the moment, they believe that those refugee camps and the presence of the what they call the Quetta Shura or the Peshawar Shura, etc., that in their belief, these exist in Pakistan, and that therefore these leaders are more likely to yield to Pakistan persuasion than anything else. And of course, I agree with the point that we need peace both for geo-economic reasons. I'm not sure about the use that India makes of Afghanistan. I think that is slightly exaggerated. But this is definite that the success of SIGPEC and the success of our relations with Central Asia and our ability to draw on their fossil fuel reserves and the electricity, etc., are dependent on the fact that there is peace in Afghanistan. And that peace will then mean that we will have a prosperous Pakistan and a prosperous Afghanistan who can trade with each other. We used to be Afghanistan's largest trading partner. We still are, but it's a diminishing trade, and it should not be. So I think we have both geo-economic and geostrategic reasons for using whatever influence we have, and not underestimating the degree of influence we have with the Taliban and the Taliban leadership as it is currently constituted.
Very well, Ambassador. We'll leave it there. That is our final comment. Of course, we appreciate all of the insights and analysis that you've all provided for us in this segment. Of course, viewers, as all of our guests there have spoken about, this issue of the Trump point of view on Pakistan is one that is muddied through the fact that he keeps ignoring the role that Pakistan has been playing in trying to bring peace to Afghanistan even before he ever reached out to Pakistan to try to get those peace talks restarted. This will be a story, of course, that will be developing in the coming days. We'll have to wait and see how that meeting, if there is one, between the Pakistani and American leaderships works out as well. We'll be back after this break with the next segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in The Scope. In this segment, we're going to discuss the Trump announcement, I should say, about a rapid withdrawal of U.S. forces from Syria. The backlash from the military and political establishment to that announcement was swift and fierce. Concerns about what this would mean for the fight against ISIS and the fate of U.S.-backed forces in Syria were raised. The president has now had to revise his pullout schedule to an as of now unclear date, though his desire to rid himself of, quote, sand and death in Syria remains. What does this foggy picture mean for the U.S. role going forward in Syria? To discuss all of that a bit further, we're joined by Adam bin Said, who is a political analyst who's joining us from Istanbul. And we're also joined by Professor Jamal Wakim, who is an international relations expert and is a professor of history and international relations at the Lebanese University. And he's joining us on the line from Beirut. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Adam, I'd like to start with you and get your point of view from where you are about the Trump announcement to begin with about pulling out from Syria and now seemingly his revision to slow down that pullout.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. The Trump announcement for the slowdown from 30 days to 120 days isn't really consequential so long as he does pull out. Now, the reasons for justifying this delay were reportedly because Pentagon officials approached him and told him that this was the minimum time possible for a pullout in terms of logistics and securing a safe withdrawal for U.S. troops. So I think at face value, this is legitimate, and they're concerned about not repeating the mistakes of Iraq and a sudden pullout, often leaving other critical areas unsecured and undefended.
And Jamal, what do you make of that? Do you agree that this makes sense for there to be a slower pullout from Syria on the part of the United States?
Well, we need to admit the fact that in spite of the declaration of Donald Trump that he's withdrawing his troops, but we didn't see any clear signs of this withdrawal so far. We know that there are a lot of quarrels in the United States between various centers of power regarding this withdrawal, and at the same time it seems that the United States is implicated in escalating its operations in eastern Syria, especially air raids. So all analysts are agreeing that it's a redeployment rather than withdrawal, and at the same time, the United States can overlook eastern Syria from its bases in Iraq at a time when it's giving a free hand for ISIS operatives to operate against the Syrian army and against other troops or groups that are fighting ISIS. So I believe that this withdrawal is not a real withdrawal. It's a redeployment, and at the same time, it's a sign or a first step towards escalating the situation in Syria, because the United States doesn't want to go empty-handed from this country.
So, Jamal, what does the United States want from Syria? Though you said redeployment, that's quite the opposite of what Trump has promised. Why would the U.S. want to stay in Syria?
Yeah, well, from a geopolitical perspective, Syria is the heart of the Middle East. It's the region where all international trade routes since early history until now intersect. So that's why, from a geopolitical perspective, whoever wants to control the Middle East wants to control Syria, and whoever wants to have a piece or stake in of influence in the Middle East needs to have a foothold in Syria. And this explains why the United States is keen on having a foothold in Syria. The whole Syrian crisis was part of a geopolitical agenda by the United States to redraw the geopolitical map of the whole Middle East in a way that could ensure the loyalty of this region to the United States on one hand, and to use this region as an obstacle that could prevent Russia, China, and Iran from having access to the East Mediterranean. So this is the real core of the crisis in Syria and the Middle East in general. Okay. And in the past 7 years, the United States have lost ground, especially that the insurgent groups that were supported by it or its allies, they lost ground in front of the Syrian army, and that's why the United States intervened directly in eastern Syria. Now that its objectives weren't met through its direct intervention, it wants to redeploy its troops and at the same time give a free hand for ISIS operatives to take hold of certain territory, key territory between Syria and Iraq in order to draw a wedge between these two.
Okay, Jamal, I'm just going to come in here because I wanted to add more to this conversation, if you allow me. We're also now joined by Mr. Tawheed Asadi, who is a political commentator, and he's joining us from Tehran. Now he is also the editor at the World Desk of the ISNA news agency and is a PhD candidate in regional studies. Tawheed, thanks for joining us here in The Scope. Give us the point of view, Tawheed, from where you are in Tehran about the U.S. pullout from Syria. The Israelis, Tawheed, would be concerned, of course, about such a pullout because of Iran. What do you make of that?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I think before we begin, we need to, as my friend mentioned, refer to the reasons behind this withdrawal. But again, prior to that, we need to notice that this withdrawal is, more importantly, is a sign of U.S. failure in the region, and it shows how U.S. interventionist foreign policy is not working. But in terms of the implications, well, we need to take a look at different perspectives. First of all, we need to take a look at how it's going to work in Syria. So it's not going to be that much interesting point for Israeli regime because of the fact that when U.S. Withdrawal takes place from the northern parts of the Syria, it's going to be kind of concern for the Israeli regime, which is not related to just Iran. Just a couple of months ago, we saw kind of conflict that took place between Russia and Israel. So it means that when the Americans are leaving this part of the world, then it's not going to be for the benefit of the Israelis. Then the second point is that this is going to be not only affect Syria itself, but also the other players, foreign players in the region, including Saudi Arabia, and more importantly, including Turkey, and then a lot of other countries. Then another point is that U.S. withdrawal, basically it is told that it is due to the campaign promises that Trump made, that it was supposed to leave the region, and then it was due to perhaps economic statecraft and the kind of foreign policy that Trump follows in order not to get intervened in such situations. But basically, one of the key points that we need to pay attention is that U.S. withdrawal, and generally speaking, Western withdrawal from Syria, is a clear indicative of the fact that the Western alliance is not working when it comes to Middle East. As you see, just a couple of years after this Western alliances, the alliances, the trilateral alliance between Russia, Iran, and Turkey it started to develop, and then the result was that in a shorter period of time, this coalition ended up in quite clear results, quite clear cooperations between different sides in the region. So it shows how important it is to have regional powers in the game, and then you see the impact of regional powers. Then I think the other point is related to the objectives. My friend from I don't know his name, but my friend told that one of the reasons behind U.S. presence was so-called defeating ISIS. Yeah. But look at the dialogue and look at the kind of discourse that is already there. They a couple of years ago, they used to say that we are going to defeat ISIS. Now the discourse has been changed to ISIS is gone. So you see how this active voice has turned out to a passive voice. They don't refer to the people.
If you allow me to just come in here, because I wanted Adam back in. Adam, you know, the mention of Turkey, I wanted to bring that up with you, if I may, because there is a lot of talk about what Turkey is feeling at this point in time, specifically when it comes to this U.S. withdrawal. There is one concern about the YPG keeping the U.S.-supplied weapons that it has in its hands at this point in time, Turkey being concerned about that. And on the other hand, then there is concern about what Turkey will do if the U.S. were to withdraw in northern Syria, specifically vis-a-vis the Kurds. What can you tell us about that?
I think that we're overlooking something major here. We're analyzing the root causes of the U.S. withdrawal and saying that's because Syria is a crossroads of civilization, if you may, and that it's part of a larger conspiracy or geopolitical game to control the region. The reality is that the U.S. is losing out in Syria and has been losing out for some time. Now, to quote Clausewitz, war is a continuation of politics, and the U.S. never really entered Syria with a clear strategy for what it wanted, and wasn't clear on what it wanted to begin with. Increasingly, over the last couple of months, there's been deeper and deeper coverage. Amnesty International has reported on war crimes by the group, and the U.S. effectively found that it was costing them more and more to use them as a proxy. With regards to the interests in the region, I think all parties at this point, whether Iran, Russia, or Turkey, want constitutional elections. They want stability more than anything else.
Okay, so Tawhid, tell us about the point of view from Iran when it comes to the U.S. withdrawal from Syria. You know, the Americans saying, Donald Trump saying that essentially that they have made a lot of progress in the fight against ISIS. Do you think that Iran would be concerned, Tawhid, about what would be left behind after the Americans leave Syria, regarding, of course, the threat of ISIS and other such terrorist groups?
I'm strongly convinced that when it comes to Iran's concerns, it is more related to the U.S. presence in the region rather than U.S. withdrawal from the region. So from the Iranian side, U.S. withdrawal from Syria is, first of all, a very positive point because it shows that regional problems should be solved in a regional manner. Then the second point is that, no, I don't think it's going to be that much important because the United States presence in Syria was nothing but but a way to make it more messy. So they sponsored some groups which are not that much interesting for the peace of the region. Then they sponsored some Kurdish groups which are so-called, the Turkish government called them terrorist groups. I'm not sure about that designation, but the thing is that look at the groups that the United States is sponsoring in the region and in Syria. Basically, they are trying to make more mess. And then when it comes to Iranian side, Iranian side is, as I told you before, is quite clear on this stance that Syrian problem should solve by Syrian people, and then if it's supposed to be a new constitution, it should be drafted by Syrian parties, different political parts, and then if it is supposed to be helped, it should be helped in a way that the solution would stay still domestic. But this is not the stance that we hear from the government of the United States or other Western governments. Okay. Well, when it comes to their policies, they claim that they're looking for constitution. When it comes to their, let's say, statements, there are some nice words going on and on. But the thing is that this was just Russia, Iran, and Turkey that made clear, practical efforts in order to make this constitutional gathering possible, and in order to make it possible for Syrian people to decide by themselves, not by other countries, not by some foreign interventionist states to come and decide for them. This is the Iranian stance, to let them decide.
If you allow me, I wanted to bring in Jamal Wakim back in. He's still with us. And Jamal, I wanted to get your point of view on one very important factor here, and that I know you mentioned in your first answer as well, Jamal, is that of Israel. Because the Israelis, many Israeli officials have expressed dismay about Trump's decision to pull out from Syria. Israel saying that it feels surrounded, essentially. It has a strong Hezbollah on one side, and then it believes it would have Iranian presence in Syria as well. What do you make of that factor, Jamal?
Well, for Israel, it's very much concerned, first of all, by the resilience of the Syrian state and its capacity to overcome the crisis that it faced for 7 years or even 8 years now. Of course, it's also concerned about the recovery of the Syrian army on one hand, and the stationing of Iranian experts and military experts and Hezbollah activists in Syria, because they fear of the extension of the border of the confrontation line between Israel and the resistance over the Golan Heights, and this is a crucial region for them. The Golan was occupied like 50 years ago because of its strategic location and nature. And at the same time, Hezbollah was planning with the Syrian state to extend the confrontation line to the Golan Heights, especially during the first days of the Syrian crisis. So this is one reason. Another reason is that Israel is planning on integrating the region, the Middle East, and it wants to redraw the geopolitical map of the region based on confessional states, so to divide the Arab states into sub-states based on ethnic, religious, and confessional lines. And this plan failed, and this is why Israel is so concerned about the redeployment or withdrawal of American troops, because it's a sign of the failure of the whole geopolitical agenda of the United States and its allies in the region. So that's why I believe that it could draw Israel into the confrontation directly, and we could witness an Israeli aggression against Lebanon and Syria. This is a probability.
Adam, what do you make? Do you think that the Israelis, obviously they're not happy with the situation of any U.S. withdrawal from Syria. Do you think that that means that they'll get that much more involved then in Syria?
I think our friend here is mischaracterizing the issue. And first of all, the description of Hezbollah's presence in Syria as mere activists is a bit of an understatement. Moreover, the statement that Hezbollah and the Assad regime were seeking to take back the Golan Heights during the beginning of the Syrian civil war is a bit of a revisionist statement on history itself. Israel obviously is concerned that its major ally in the region is stepping out. But let's look to the statements by Netanyahu a few days ago, where he said the Arab states consider Israel an indispensable ally. This is the state of things as they are now. I do not see an Israeli intervention in Lebanon anytime soon, for that matter. Lebanon simply does not warrant the strategic value for Israel right now. However, we must look to the fact that Syria has been a hotbed for Hezbollah activity previous even to the Syrian civil war. You had regular Israeli bombings of Hezbollah convoys, transfer of equipment and materials between the Assad regime and Hezbollah previously, and that role will continue, probably further aided by the F-35. One of their major concerns is the deployment of Russian S-300s in the country, which allegedly have the capacity to target planes and extend all the way out to Israel itself. So its strategic position has deteriorated. And let us not overlook that for both Israel and the United States, their involvement in the region is not over. They were involved before they were military involved. The U.S. was supporting and funding terrorist groups on the ground, or rebels, as you like. And Israel was involved on the ground by providing medical support to ISIS fighters on the ground, and this is documented and established. And if you take a look at the recent statement by the new CIA director, there is an increased push on establishing more foreign agents outside. We're returning back to the traditional models of interventionism now more than ever. I do not see the role of the U.S. over at all. They're simply realizing that the efficient way to do it is not having so much skin in the game, as they say.
Very well. We'll leave that as our final word, gentlemen. Of course, we appreciate all the insights and analysis that you've provided. And for this discussion, that was Adam Ben Said, political analyst, speaking to us from Istanbul. We were also joined by Tawhid Asadi, political commentator, speaking to us from Tehran. And we were also joined by Jamal Wakim, international relations expert, who was speaking to us from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. As all of our guests, their viewers said, this issue of Trump pulling out troops from Syria is one which the detail of when that happens specifically is not necessarily the important one. What the root causes and the implications really are what's more important here. A lot of the talk, I should say, about the delay in the U.S. pullout from Syria is more down to domestic politics and pressure from the military and political establishment of that country. But what's important here is who gains from this, what will happen after the U.S. pulls out vis-a-vis more Turkish involvement, more possible Israeli involvement, what will happen to the Iranians, the Russians, etc. And then, of course, what happens to the Syrian people themselves as well as the Syrian government. A lot remains hanging, and we'll have to wait and see how that all works out in the coming days when the U.S. does finally decide to pull out. That's all for the moment, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi, and this has been Scope.